about tamas, rajas, and sattva, the three-stranded rope are the three mental temperaments that are within every one of us, which makes us unique in our personalities. When we take people, even the same family, father and mother, brothers, sisters, none of us will have the same personalities. We can say like equal personalities. We differ because the proportions of these three mental temperaments differs from person to person. No two persons in this whole universe can be said to have the same mental temperaments. We can analyze it with a bit of a generic example. We all drink coffee. What is coffee made of? What are the main ingredients in the coffee?
Milk, coffee powder, sugar.
Yeah. So it's coffee powder or decoction we can call. It's milk and sugar. These three are the only ingredients or the main ingredients in the coffee. Suppose you to different states of India or 10 different countries of the world and taste the coffee. You kind of taste everywhere. In one place of the in India itself, if you go to different states, are you able to hear me? There is some network
Yeah.
issue. I'm getting some. Okay.
Yeah, your
If you're
voice
not able
is
to hear, let me know
distorted.
because
Yeah.
I'm getting a what? Is it?
Yeah,
Give
it's
me a
little
minute. No, I'll
distorted in the
just check
middle.
and come. Just a minute. Okay. So when we go to different parts of the India itself, if you take at one place, there will be the milk proportion would be more. At some place, the sugar quantity would be more. And in some places, it would be the decoction would be more. And if you go to America, it would be totally a black coffee with a very little milk or no milk in it. So with a simple coffee itself, you're not able to get the same taste when the ingredients are the same. Think about the human beings' mental temperament. So it's just an example or to analyze like how sattva, tamas, the varying levels of sattva, rajas, and tamas makes us unique or different personalities. And again, the personalities varies from time to time, meaning these three proportions, if you say that a person has a mental temperament, at this point of time, his sattva is more, tamas is less, and rajas is less, it doesn't mean it will be the same throughout. Every moment, whenever your feelings changes, when you get emotions and feelings, the proportions of this sattva, tamas, and rajas also varies. So let me tell example. There was a politician. He was dressed in white and white, and he was going through to the Senate in his car. While going on the road, it rained so heavily, and the car stopped in traffic in between. On the side of the road, there was a big water stagnant place, and there was a piglet which was actually making a screeching noise out of it being trapped inside a pit. So this politician would not think anything. He would fastly go and take the piglet out of the pit, and he would put it on the ground. What do you think when you hear about the act of this politician? What do you think would be the act of this politician?
He is very helpful or very.
He's very helpful, okay?
Kind.
He's kind, okay? So the act
It
when
is
you
an act
see,
of kindness. Yes.
yeah, it's an act of kindness. So when I narrate this story and when you hear this story, you feel that it's an act of kindness, being such a great person or a person of a high cadre also still he has compassion for the living beings that way. But immediately some people will ask, who are standing there will ask him, how come you were dressed in white and white and you're going to an important meeting? Why did you make your whole dress dirty? Then he will reply, I didn't save the pig because it is it's under trouble. The sound of the pig, the noise it was making, I was not able to tolerate. That's the reason I took it out of the pit, and not with the intention to save it, but to just lessen its noise because it's causing me discomfort. So after listening to this, what do you feel about his act?
He was not actually doing it as an act of kindness.
Mhm.
Just because
you
it was
re-
irritating, he tried to come out of that and saved it.
Yes.
It seemed
Can
to
you
others
relate?
that he has saved it, but
Uh-huh.
actually he didn't do.
Yeah, the intention for him to do that was different. The action, when you see outwardly, it is the manifestation of the act was kindness, but the intention behind his act was selfishness. Can you relate this to Arjuna, the sequence of events that is happening now, the way he's talking?
Yeah, he seems to be so kind. He doesn't want to fight with anybody, but actually he has to do it.
He doesn't
Maybe
he
outwardly
doesn't
he
want
may-
to. Yeah.
No, he
outwardly
doesn't
he
want to
may
do
be-
because he
Oh.
he has the intention that he will be hurt, not because everybody will be hurt, or it's not the act of like Buddha. He is not in that mode of completely for giving up the war and living a saint kind of life. But just because he thinks that he will be in pain in future, he is giving all the reasons and doing asking that let's not do the war.
Yeah. So
The
it is an
intention
act
changed.
of, he's showing the act of kindness, act to be kind, saintly, but he actually is driven by his selfishness in a way.
Yeah. Goodbye. Yes.
So it's the nature, meaning that when we talk about sattva, rajas, and tamas, it's not just the manifestation. Here, for example, if you see, the kindness is a sattvic thing, but the intention is selfish, which is rajasic. So this act becomes a rajasic act. It doesn't become a sattvic act. Similarly, we can also analyze our actions by intention as well as the manifestations. Both should be sattvic for an act to be considered sattvic. And this is again
Abhita,
Yeah.
It was selfish for him. I didn't understand the selfish part.
Selfish
I
part
understood
because
that he was giving all sorts of excuses because he didn't want to fight, because he was thinking of all those things that will happen and he was giving excuses. But how was he selfish?
in the sense like he's looking only for his happiness. He is not looking for his duty. When you don't do your duty and ignore your duty for your own pleasure, he's going with his mind saying that I cannot be happy because there will be no audience for my crowning ceremony. There will be no one to praise me. So that is an act of selfishness. When you don't, being a leader, being a kshatriya, you don't want to fight.
Okay.
Yeah.
So he was being selfish like that and giving different excuses why not to do it.
Yes.
Showing it as an act of kindness, but indeed he was being selfish.
Showing it as an act of kindness, but the drive for him to talk his kind words is not the real compassion. That's what we said. He's driven by the materialistic compassion and not with universal compassion.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah. Able to do all these exercises. She's in fact an yoga teacher, but most of the middle-aged women now we see it actually applies to both men and women. We feel a lot of fatigue. We feel a lot of stress. We feel a lot of depletion in our energy levels. And what do you think is the difference between this picture and this picture? What does the one person have and what the other person lacks?
Energy, confidence,
Yes, energy. Energy from which place? Is it a physical energy or a mental energy?
mental.
Yeah, it's a
If I
mental
feel that I
energy.
can do it, I'll be able to do it.
Exactly. So when you see two generations before us, our parents, even our grandparents, their generations were totally driven with enthusiasm towards life. Their outlook towards life was totally different. What they had was the enthusiasm to live in spite of all the struggles they were facing in their lives. With 10 children, 12 children, and with combined families, they led their life with full of energy levels. Even at the age of 90s and all, if you go to them, even though they are not able to do, they show the enthusiasm that what do you want? What do you want us to do? Or what do you like? What do you eat? But nowadays, if you see the people who are middle aged, we can take the example of us itself. How many of us have that energy levels? It's not the physical body. It's not the problem with the physical body. Mentally, we are getting drained out. The word called stress has come in quite recently in all aspects of our life. Even the normal things, which is the norm of the life, has become stress for us nowadays. Why is it so?
I think maybe it is again like I'm relating it to the previous thing. We have become selfish. Like now it is more about I'm not getting any me time. I'm not getting, so that's why when we have totally earlier our grandparents, parents, they never thought of this, that I'm not getting any time for myself. Probably that's why when we are not getting time for ourselves and doing things for others, then it mentally drains us over time.
Yeah, that is also a very valid reason. Yeah, Gargi. And can anyone else relate any other thing? Because this is the same thing that we are facing day in and day out. We all feel tired, mentally fatigued with 8 hours of office work, 2 hours of housework. Why is it so?
Then one more reason I can think, probably like whatever we are doing, we are not totally 100% giving ourselves to that work. We are taking that work as like different from us, that I'm doing this for this particular reason, but not like totally devoting ourselves to the work and enjoying that work. Once
Missing passion in
we,
the work. Yeah.
yeah, said if we have that total devotion to the work, then probably, as they say, that you will not feel tired. Like a painter who enjoys painting never tired. So if I think of our grandparents, parents, they like even feeding someone, giving food 24/7, they can just, they are fasting, still they can make food. So they are not tired because they enjoy that thing. It is
Yeah.
part of them, like they take it as one, are themselves. We take it as something like, I am cooking for them, I am doing this for them. Probably that's why.
Yeah. So it is an attitude towards the life, how we are looking at life at the current moment. How are we looking at the events that are happening to us at this point of time? That triggers the mental energy levels in us. And it's actually that constant. And the thing that we lack is living in the present. Most of us lack living in the present. We either go back to the past or think about the future, which actually depletes maximum energy from us. When we learn to live in the present moment, then the energy depletion will be far, far minimum. So our body is strong machine. It doesn't matter. The body's energy gets depleted over time. And that is the part of the life. Because physically we become weak, but mental energy can be there 100% till the last day of your life. No one can take away your mental energy because that is under your full control. Till the day you leave the world, you can radiate that positivity and mental enthusiasm, which is actually called health in Ayurveda and all. If they define what is health, they say it is not freeness, or a person who is free from all the illness is not considered a healthy person. A person is considered healthy who has enthusiasm to live. So if we have that enthusiasm to live every moment happily, that means we are healthy. No need to go and check with any doctor. So the physical strength will get you to the start line, but it's the mental strength that will get you to the finish line. Physical strength is hard work and the mental strength is perseverance. And we also need to have the spiritual strength, which is the love and acceptance. If we have all the three, we will continuously grow in our life. So today it's most like the reflection of the stories so that we will understand things in a better way to apply to our daily lives. So when I'm saying this every week, actually you can reflect upon your actions and see what is the logic, how can you apply, and how can you analyze yourself to make yourself a better person. And this is also a story, a real story that happened in the olden days in the mountains of Himalayas. There were a group of yogis who used to train their disciples or students. So at one time, the Westerners went to the camp that was organized by the yogis. And when they saw there, they saw that all the disciples or the students of yoga were asked to remove their shirts. They were standing naked without their shirt and they had to do some yoga asanas. And after doing yoga asanas, they will declare a person as the best student or the best disciple. How will they declare is the person has to wear the shirt after doing the whole process of yoga. And after wearing the shirt, they have to remove it and they have to actually wind it, meaning that they have to switch the shirt so that the sweat will come out of the shirt. Whoever gets more sweat from the shirt, that student is called, or that disciple is called the best disciple, or who has done things perfectly. And those Western people who came there were awestruck because the situation is they have come with their winter wear, they cannot withstand the cold, and they were totally awestruck with the disciples who were standing there without shirt in that cold weather and able to produce that much amount of sweat. And they will ask the guru or the disciples, how is it possible? Practically, when we see it scientifically, this is not possible in such a cold weather where it's full of snow. You cannot think of a person to sweat, and to sweat to such an extent that you are able to collect the water from the sweat is really a miracle. Then the person will say, this is not at all a miracle. This is what is the power we have within us. They call it as Mano Shakti, meaning your mental power. In other words, when we had gone through last time about the power of subconscious mind, it comes under the same thing. So they will say, it's nothing. What we did is they produced an auto suggestion to their mind from the time they started the yoga that it is hot outside and my body is going to sweat. So this is the auto suggestion. They constantly repeated, and mind got tuned or started to believe. It's a placebo effect again. The mind started to believe that and it started to produce sweat. And this is not something, a story. This is a real incident. So what do we understand from this is that if we have strong intentions, if we have strong mental qualities set, then we will be able to achieve anything. But that intention that we set should be very, very strong without any kind of fear and anxiety. Any questions in this? Any questions in this?
No, Abhita.
This just one thing. This the link of the story or like any details of the story. Can you please share later on, so that we can tell the kids also. Like if
Yeah,
this is a
I
real
got the story in one of the discourse. There is no link to the story as such.
Oh,
I
okay,
can
okay,
forward you
okay.
that discourse. Yeah.
Okay, okay, fine. Thank you so much. Okay.
So we will go to the next verse. Sankaro narakayaiva kulagnanam kulasya cha patanti pitaro hyesham lupta pindodaka kriyaha. So till the last verse, he told that there will be intermingling of castes and the caste systems will be disrupted. Now he says that because of the confusions that God created in the caste system, the destroyers of the family and the family will be destroyed and the family will go to hell. because the people who have to do the relevant reverences for the dead people are no more there. And that's why then we could not offer the rice balls and water to the people who are dead. We call it as Pindodaka Kriya is like the Shradham that we do in our families, that yearly ceremonies that we do for the departed souls. This kind of things will happen because of the confusion that God created in the caste system because of the war. So he says, because of this, our ancestors will go to hell. So this again states that Arjuna's state of mind was still in that superstitious beliefs of people going to hell or people going to heaven. And when mythologically to have a fear in the people, they normally say that to understand that if you do bad things, you will go to hell. If you do good things, you go to heaven. But in reality, the geographical locations of heaven and hell are not there anywhere. The hell or the heaven is only in your mind. It is the state of your mind. If your mind is totally in agony, stress, sorrow, suffering, then it is the state of a hell. And if it is happy, blissful, full of love and compassion, then the state of the mind is said to be a heaven. So in reality, there is no such things as heaven or hell. They are just the mental constructs. Even this kind of understanding he had, but still because of that emotion, he is not even able to come over the superstitious things to take his stand as a warrior and fight. And also the offering of rice balls or the shraddam that we do for the ancestors are done for a certain significance. We need to understand why it is being done. But in the current days, we are missing the fact or understanding the line of why we are doing, but follow it blindly. And that's why we end up in a lot of emotional turbulences when we are not able to do certain things, or when we do certain things, we are not able to do it in a certain way. When we really understand it, it is just a means of paying reverence to the elder ones because they have given us the lineage. They have given us a lot of values which we have to follow, to remember all the values that they have given to us. And for us to take forward those values, we do these things as a reverence or respect for the elderly. And as such, believing that if you don't give this, they will suffer in hell or they will not get food. So that kind of things are all not the real beliefs. So his thing is here, they will go to the hellish condition because of the Varna Shankaraha, it is the intermingling of castes. So we should not conduct rituals mechanically without understanding them. And performance or non-performance of rituals is totally our choice. When we understand how the ritual works, we would be rightly convinced for doing it and can preach others with conviction. To understand, we need to have the right knowledge and right discriminating capability. In such cases, there would be no place for fear or anxieties. So how many of us think that we give children certain rules, or we tell children to also follow certain things? But if they ask back us, why should we do this? Do we have answers for all the things that we say them to follow?
No.
Not for all, but for few maybe, that's all. Not
Yeah,
for all.
that's, like some we can answer, but not all.
Yeah, but not all. So for me also, my personal case is also like that. My grandmother was very orthodox. We used to have a lot of things that she would say. Like it's a God-fearing atmosphere that they brought us in. For everything, it's like God will come and take away your eyes. God will come and punish you like this. God will come and punish you like that, for each and everything. But from my childhood, I was more like a very, what can you say, very curious person. Like whenever she says she keeps the prasad and goes, don't touch it, it's for the God, you should not touch it overnight. I always used to take, eat it and see. And tomorrow I used to feel for myself, nothing happened. So this is not true. So certain things, when we are curious and we learn, and the same thing when I pass on to my kids, I will not tell them things to do without myself being convinced about the things. If we ask them to pray, we need to tell them why we need to pray. When we explain about God, we need to explain them logically as what it is. Certain things, yeah, are experiences. We cannot actually explain them in words, which needs to be felt. But a more near logical reasoning, if you give for the children to follow, they will get conviction in that, and when they follow or apply, they will get the clarity, and they can pass it on to the others very easily, because this generation kids are all very scientific kids. Their intellect really functions well. They ask us a lot of questions. If you see us and our kids, we never asked questions. We were suppressed with our intellectual capabilities, in the sense we were asked not to ask questions. We were said not to ask back. We are saying this, so you have to do. That was the system in the house as well as in the school. But here, at least, now the kids ask us a lot of questions. Asking the questions is an indication that they are starting to use their intellect. So let's not suppress the questions that they ask. If we don't know also, I think we have ways to find out the logic behind that. Yeah, most of the scientific beliefs they had were all very, very profound and very close to the nature's alignment. But what was missing in the passage from one generation to another generation was exactly how we did. For example, sleeping on time, waking up early morning, everything has an immense benefit on our physiology. But we don't follow it. Now, the modern world, what we do is we take things only as per our convenience and our comfort. We really don't see why they have said it, why we should do it in that particular time. We will do it whenever we want to do it, because I'm so busy. I have my work. I cannot do it now, so I'll do it at that time. But when you exactly go and see why it was supposed to do at that time exactly, there would be a scientific rationale that was backed up for their doing in certain way. Do you have any other views? दोषैरेतैर्कुलज्ञानां वर्णसङ्करकारकैः उत्साद्यन्ते जातिधर्माः कुलधर्माश्च शाश्वताः. So now he says, by the evil deeds of destroyers of family, which causes confusion of caste, the eternal religious rights of the caste and families are destroyed. It is the same line of the thing where he says the intermingling of caste system again being bringing the destruction of the castes in the society. So it is almost the same kind of context he told in the previous two verses. उत्सन्नकुलधर्माणां मनुष्याणां जनार्दन नरके नियतं वासः भवतीत्यनुशुश्रुमा. And here he says, O Krishna or Janardana, so that is inevitable for those men in whose families the religious practices have been destroyed, to dwell in hell for an unknown period of time. In the previous, the last to last verse, he told that because of the intermingling of caste system, there will be no one to offer the rice balls or the pinda pradhanam for the elders, and that's why they will be in hell. Now he confirms that it's not that they will be in hell, but they will dwell in hell for a longer period of time. He says, Narake niyatam vasaha. They will totally stay in the hell for a long time, because there are no one in the families to do the religious practices. So from the kinds of the Varnashrama system of peace, he again starts about the family traditions and people dwelling in hell. So his belief in infinite suffering in hell indicates the fear of punishment. Here, the thing that he is talking about, all these things, is not from a very clear state of mind. It is from the fear. So he is displaying multifold emotions here: attachment, desire, anger, revenge, fear. All these are the current emotions that Arjuna is undergoing, because of which his intellect has been overwhelmed and it has left him in a confused state. So our society maintains religion by entertaining and instilling spiritual values in their lives. And the rituals are only symbolic reminders to apply these values in practical life. Even in the era of Mahabharata, the society has lost its spiritual values because the way the Kauravas behaved in the society was a replica or was indication of how the values have fallen down. And because the values have fallen down, to bring back the values, the war was inevitable. Aho batamahat papam kartum vyavasita vayam yadrajyasukalobhena hantum swajanamudyataha. Now he says, previously he told it's only papam. Now he says it's mahat papam, meaning that it's a great sin. Now we are getting involved in this great sin by preparing to kill. Again he says swajanam, meaning to kill our own people. Why are we trying to kill? For the greed, for the pleasures of kingdom. And this statement is totally wrong because the intention of the war was not out of greed. It was not to get the kingdom out of greed. It was to get the kingdom, their righteous share of the kingdom. The greedy people were actually the Kauravas. But he says now, we don't want to get involved in this war, which is a great sin. Because we are trying to kill our own kinsmen. Yadi mama pratikaram ashastram shastrapanayah dhartarashtrarane hanyuhu anme kshemataram bhavet. So he finally says, if the sons of Dhritarashtra armed with weapons should slay me unarmed and unresting in battle, that would be better for me. So he feels now what is better instead of fighting war is he wants to stay unarmed in the battle. And if the sons of Dhritarashtra or the Kauravas come with weapons and try to attack him, he will feel happy by getting attacked by them and by getting killed by them instead of waging this war against them. So this is the last but one verse in this chapter. The next verse is the last verse of this chapter, which is told by Sanjaya. So here he tries to bring here a kind of a sacrifice. When you hear this, what do you feel? That Arjuna is sacrificing his own life, is ready to sacrifice his own life to protect or to avoid killing his relatives. He is sacrificing his own life. That is the kind of sacrifice that he is putting forth here. And this sacrifice is not really a sacrifice or a purposeful sacrifice, because the true sacrifice arises with one's inner personality will not, but it's not coming from out here. It is coming from the outward situation and momentarily. It is not a true sacrifice, which is correlating with that inner personality. The sense of sacrifice which he claims did not arise until he became overwhelmed with a gust of emotions, until the time he was showing his spirit of fighting. He wanted to see with whom he has to fight. Until that time, he did not come into a conclusion that he wants to go unarmed and get attacked by Kauravas. But after that emotion stuck, a turbulence started. Physically, he started feeling that emotions. Then one by one, his intellect started to fail and his emotions overtook his logic, and he started to say all these things in sequence. And finally, saying that he wants to sacrifice his life instead of killing his own people. So this is an example of false vairagya or renunciation. In our families also, if you see that if a person wants to leave his family and go out and become a sannyasi, because he is not able to take the problems that are coming in his family life, such a person is not considered a true sannyasi, because that is escapism. So here false vairagya or this renunciation we can refer to as escapism. And it's not true because it's not coming out of his personality. It is coming because of the situation at that point of time. And just to escape from the situation, the person is trying to find out a way. And this is the last shloka. Sanjaya uvacha yeva muktvarjunam sankhye ratopastavupavishat Visrujya Sasharam Chapam Shokasam Vignamanasah. So until the last verse, Arjuna has explained his condition and Sanjaya is narrating what happened next. So having thus spoken in the midst of the battlefield, Arjuna sat down on the seat of the chariot, casting away his bow and arrow with a mind distressed with sorrow. So he just cast away his bow and sorrow. And that is the typical Bhagavad Gita picture we normally see where Arjuna has left his bow and arrow and with a great distressed state, he just sit down in the chariot. And the second chapter continues with his same state, how he further proceeds his conversations. There is a further explanations that I have prepared for this for analysis, which I will continue in the next class. Do you have any questions in this 5-6 verses today?
No, ma'am.
These 5-6 verses to actually analyze the exact word-to-word meaning or that current, because all these things are actually related to the state of life that was there in those times. So we cannot apply the words or the context exactly, but only thing that we understand from his logical conclusions or the logical statements is that all that are not coming from his intellect, meaning that they are not all logical. He sounds logical, but they are not logical. So any questions?
No,
Just one thing in that, in one verse, you said that there is no like this hell or a heaven. It is all in here only that in our mind, like if we are very distressed and all. But that the soul doesn't, does that mean that the soul doesn't experience any hell or heaven?
See that, there are a lot of things that are mentioned in different kinds of books about the soul, the things. There are a lot of ideologies. It's up to us to take up what feels appealing to us. But in the thing that my takeaway is in the current life that we are living in, the emphasis is always to do good. And the way the parents or the grandparents insisted upon the hell or heaven is to direct us in doing good deeds. So if you want to
Yes.
brood after life after that's different story, which you can go and refer to different kinds of scriptures available, and each one has a different direction. So I cannot tell that this is right or this is wrong, because I myself don't know what is right or what is wrong, and no one knows with our experience, and we are not in that level of self realization. So as far as I take away to the practical application of what we have to live, I feel that whatever the elders emphasized about this is actually to make things good or bad, and this heaven or hell could be related to suffering and happiness in our lives. And
True,
when
yes,
we
that's
go with that peace of mind in this life, let's see what happens, because no one knows what happens. So being good is the thing that we are trying to inculcate and follow in the current
yes, true.
path of life. Yeah.
Yeah, so thank you.
So any other questions? So from the things that we have said from the first thing, I think you can slowly try to analyze yourself. The thing that I would recommend you is to